Amelia Wilson, a young entrepreneur with big dreams and an even bigger sense of independence, had just moved into a charming, albeit dilapidated house overlooking the ocean in a small coastal town. Her decision to purchase the property wasn't just about owning a piece of land, it was about finding a new beginning. The house, nestled on a cliff with an expansive view of the water, seemed like the perfect place to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and start fresh. Amelia had always envisioned a quiet life, but she also wanted to create something more, a gathering spot for the community where locals and tourists alike could unwind, sip coffee, and enjoy the serene beauty of the coastline. Her plan was to restore the old house to its former glory and turn it into a welcoming cafe with a spacious outdoor patio that overlooked the beach, a place where people could come to relax, enjoy the sunset, and savor a moment of peace. The idea seemed simple enough. A small, cozy cafe that would serve local delicacies, with a charming patio that would offer unobstructed views of the beach. But there was a problem, one that Amelia hadn't anticipated. Her neighbor Karen Braxton, a middle-aged woman who lived in the house next door, had a much different view of the beach. Amelia soon realized that Karen, with her brash attitude and overwhelming sense of entitlement, had taken it upon herself to control access to the coastline. Karen had been living in her large, well-maintained house for years, and she believed that, because her property was closer to the beach, she had the right to restrict who could use the access path leading to the sand. Amelia was taken aback when Karen, in no uncertain terms, informed her that she was not allowed to use the beach access path that ran beside Karen's property. According to Karen, it was private property, and only those who had permission could pass through. At first, Amelia tried to reason with Karen, explaining that the access path was a public easement and that she had every right to use it. But Karen wasn't interested in reason. She scoffed at Amelia's attempt to explain the legalities, and in a condescending tone, she told her that the rules were different when it came to her property. Amelia, though initially taken aback by Karen's audacity, didn't back down. She had spent her savings on the house, and her dream of building a cafe by the ocean was not going to be destroyed by a petty dispute with a neighbor. But what started as a minor inconvenience quickly escalated into a full-blown battle. Karen, refusing to accept Amelia's right to the path, began to take more aggressive actions, blocking the way with large barriers and placing private property signs along the access road. Amelia, feeling the pressure mounting, realized she had no choice but to fight back. Not just for her right to access the beach, but for the future of her cafe and the dream she had worked so hard to build. She knew that this wasn't just a dispute over land. It was about standing up for what was right, even if it meant taking on someone who seemed determined to control everything around her. The stage was set for a confrontation that would push Amelia to her limits, but also give her the chance to show that determination, intelligence, and community support could overcome even the most entitled and manipulative opponents. As the tension between them grew, Amelia steeled herself for the battle ahead, knowing that if she wanted to keep her dream alive, she would have to outsmart her opponent at every turn. Amelia couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the first set of concrete barriers being placed across the access path. It wasn't just a minor inconvenience anymore. Karen was making her intentions clear. The barriers were large, clunky, and far more than just a subtle attempt to obstruct the path. This was a deliberate, calculated move to block any chance of Amelia, or anyone else for that matter, getting through. They weren't just any ordinary barriers, they were the kind of heavy-duty structures used in construction sites, sturdy and designed to stay put. Amelia stood frozen, staring at the enormous blocks being placed by two men she had never seen before. They were working quickly, not even glancing her way as they continued their task with a mechanical precision. Amelia knew that this wasn't a random act. This was an escalation. At first, she thought it was a mistake, that maybe Karen was just having a bad day, or perhaps there was some kind of misunderstanding. Amelia had tried to be patient with her. She'd tried to be understanding. After all, this was her first time living in a close-knit small community, and she didn't want to ruffle feathers. She wanted to build relationships, not make enemies. But now, standing there watching as the large concrete blocks took shape across the pathway, she realized that Karen wasn't just trying to make her life difficult. She was trying to steal something from her. Amelia's cafe, the dream she had been nurturing for so long, depended on the access to that beach. The beautiful, unspoiled stretch of sand was what made her cafe unique, what made it stand out from any other establishment. Without it, her dream would fall apart. She couldn't afford to let this go on. As Amelia walked up to the workers, her mind raced with a mix of frustration, anger, and confusion. She was unsure of what to say, unsure of how to make her case in a way that wouldn't escalate the situation further. But she had to try. This wasn't just a small matter anymore. It was her future at stake. The workers didn't seem to acknowledge her presence at first, their focus solely on the task at hand. Amelia cleared her throat and finally spoke, her voice steady but edged with a quiet fury. "Excuse me, what exactly are you doing here?" The two men paused, glancing at each other briefly before one of them turned to face her. His expression was impassive, indifferent even. "We're just putting in some barriers," he said casually, as if it were no big deal, as if this was all perfectly normal. "Karen told us to block off this path." Amelia's heart dropped. She felt a pang of disbelief, a momentary sense of helplessness. She knew Karen was behind this, but hearing it from one of the men made it all the more real, and it felt like a punch in the gut. Amelia squared her shoulders and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself before she responded. "This is a public path. You don't have the right to block it off. I've spoken to the local authorities, and they've confirmed that this path is accessible to everyone." The worker shrugged. "Karen's instructions are clear," he said, before returning to his task. The other worker said nothing, continuing to lift and move the heavy concrete blocks with an air of indifference. Amelia could feel the frustration building inside her. It was clear that Karen had planned this move, and now it was as if she was using these men as pawns in her little game. But Amelia was no pawn, and she wasn't going to let Karen control her life, her business, or her future. She turned on her heel and walked back to her house, her mind already working through the next steps. Amelia knew she had to act fast. She couldn't let this be the end of her dream. She had come too far. But she also knew that taking legal action against Karen might be more complicated than she'd initially anticipated. It wasn't just about a physical barrier now. It was about a person with significant influence in the town, a woman who wasn't afraid to use her power to get what she wanted. Later that evening, Amelia sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by documents and legal papers. She'd spent hours researching the laws on property access and easements, trying to figure out if there was a loophole, something that would allow her to fight back legally. It was a complex process, and the more she read, the more it became clear that Karen wasn't the only one who could make life difficult. The local government, the property laws, the zoning regulations, everything seemed to favor those who had money and power. But Amelia wasn't about to back down just because the odds were stacked against her. She wasn't a person who gave up easily. As she sifted through the papers, she came across a reference to public beach access rights, a small but crucial piece of information. It said that any attempt to block access to a public beach, especially one with established paths, was illegal. That was the breakthrough she had been hoping for. Amelia knew she had found something that could work in her favor. The next day, she met with a lawyer, someone she'd been recommended to by a local friend. He was a seasoned attorney with experience in land disputes, and his first reaction when Amelia explained the situation was a mix of skepticism and concern. He'd heard of Karen Braxton, and he wasn't impressed by the woman's reputation. But when Amelia mentioned the public access rights, his attitude shifted. "You've got a case here," he said, though he quickly cautioned her. "But be prepared for a fight. This isn't going to be easy." Amelia nodded, knowing that it wouldn't be. She was ready for the battle ahead. She didn't just want to win, she needed to protect her dream. As she left the lawyer's office, Amelia felt a surge of determination. She was going to fight for what was right, for her future, and for the community that had supported her from the start. And she wasn't going to let Karen Braxton or anyone else stand in her way. The day after her meeting with the lawyer, Amelia felt an overwhelming sense of determination. Armed with the legal information she had gathered, she knew she was ready to take action against Karen. But she also understood the magnitude of the battle ahead. It wasn't just about physical barriers, it was about something much deeper. Power, control, and the ruthless manipulation of authority. She had underestimated Karen's ability to go to great lengths to get her way, but that was about to change. Amelia wasn't the kind of person who backed down when faced with adversity. She had come to this town to build something, to create a community space where people could relax and enjoy the ocean, and she wasn't going to let a bully with deep pockets take that away from her. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she sat on her back porch, the sound of the waves in the distance, and took a long breath. She wasn't alone in this fight. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how many people in the community were behind her. even if they hadn't fully realized it yet. The next morning, Amelia called a few of the local business owners. Her cafe was still in the early stages, but it was the heart of the neighborhood now, and she was convinced that the more people who understood what was happening, the more support she would have. First, she called Lucy, who ran the small art gallery down the street. Lucy had been one of the first people to welcome Amelia when she moved to the town, and over the past few weeks, the two had become good friends. Amelia explained the situation to Lucy, and she could hear the outrage in her friend's voice as she listened. "Amelia, this is insane. No one has the right to block access to the beach. I've been dealing with Karen for years. She thinks she can control everything here. I've seen it happen with others, but I didn't realize she was going after you too." Lucy was quick to agree to help Amelia, offering to spread the word and rally some of the other business owners. Amelia felt a wave of relief. If there was one thing she was certain of, it was that Lucy had the kind of social connections that could make a difference. They quickly decided to meet that afternoon and start organizing their response. Later that day, Amelia and Lucy sat down in the cafe, over cups of strong coffee, mapping out their strategy. They decided to meet with the other local business owners to discuss how they could all stand together in opposition to Karen's actions. The town, though small, had a bustling community of independent shops, galleries, and cafes, and each of them depended on the beach as a draw for visitors. Without public access to the beach, not only would Amelia's cafe suffer, but many other local businesses would too. It was clear that the economic impact would be far-reaching. They also discussed the potential legal battle and how they could use their collective voices to apply pressure on Karen and anyone who might be helping her. "We need to show her that this isn't just about you or your cafe, Amelia," Lucy said, her voice firm and resolute. "This is about the entire town, the community, and the future of this place. Karen can't get away with this, not when so many people depend on that access." By the time Amelia had finished meeting with Lucy and other members of the local business community, they had formulated a clear plan. They would start by holding a community meeting the following week to raise awareness about the issue, and to get people to understand that Karen's actions weren't just a personal vendetta. They were a threat to everyone who relied on the beach. Amelia had already spoken with the lawyer who agreed to attend and speak about the legal implications of Karen's actions. The more the community understood that Karen's behavior wasn't just about her own personal agenda, but was against the law, the better. They were going to expose her for what she was, a bully who believed she could control everything, including people's access to public property. As they worked to rally support, things with Karen began to escalate even further. The following day, after Amelia had met with the other local business owners, she drove to her cafe to find that someone had slashed the tires on her car. It was the kind of petty, cowardly act that made her blood boil. She looked around the parking lot, half expecting to see Karen standing nearby, a smug look on her face, but she was nowhere in sight. Amelia took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. This wasn't the first time Karen had resorted to underhanded tactics to intimidate her, and it wouldn't be the last. She would not let herself be scared off by these kinds of threats. Amelia called the police and filed a report, but deep down she knew that getting the authorities involved might not be enough. They would look into it, but the police couldn't stop Karen from continuing her campaign of harassment. That night, as Amelia sat in her house, the anger simmering beneath the surface, she made a vow to herself that she wouldn't be intimidated. Karen had underestimated her, and it was time to show her just how much she was willing to fight for what was hers. The next few days were filled with tension. Amelia continued to push forward with the community meeting, though she could feel the pressure mounting. She had become a target, not just of Karen's wrath, but of the small, insidious forces that worked behind the scenes in this town. Amelia knew she couldn't take this on alone, and that the more support she could gather, the more she would be able to push back against Karen's attempts to take control. With the help of Lucy and the other business owners, she started to gain momentum. The community meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday, and Amelia's heart raced as the day approached. The stakes were higher than ever, but she felt confident that with the right people on her side, she could make her case and stand up to Karen once and for all. As the meeting loomed, Karen seemed to realize that things were beginning to slip from her grasp. The stakes were rising, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely concerned. Her usual smugness was beginning to falter, and Amelia could sense that the more pressure she applied, the more Karen would fight back. But Amelia was ready. She had prepared herself for this moment. She wasn't going to let Karen's intimidation tactics or her attempts to control everything get in the way of her dream. The battle was just beginning, and Amelia was determined to see it through, no matter what it took. As the days passed, Amelia's resolve hardened. The meeting was fast approaching, and with each passing hour, she could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She had gathered a small but determined group of supporters from the local businesses and the community. People who, like her, depended on the public access to the beach for their livelihood. But there was something else stirring in Amelia's chest. An uneasy feeling that perhaps, even with all the support, she was still missing something crucial. The legal battle with Karen was far from over, and with every obstacle Karen put in her path, Amelia found herself more and more entangled in a web of legalities, threats, and emotional tolls. The tire slashing was only the beginning. Karen had taken things to the next level, and Amelia knew that in order to win this, she would have to dig deeper than she'd ever planned. One afternoon, after a grueling few days spent finalizing the details for the meeting, Amelia decided to take a walk along the beach to clear her mind. It was a habit she'd developed ever since she moved to the town. The sound of the ocean, the scent of the salt in the air had a calming effect on her. She often found herself wandering to the edge of the beach, looking out over the water, thinking about her grandmother who had passed away the year before, and the life Amelia had left behind in the city. The idea of this place being taken away from her, of having to fight for something so basic as access to the beach, felt almost surreal. It wasn't just a physical space that Karen was trying to steal, it was the heart of Amelia's dreams. As Amelia strolled along the shoreline, a thought occurred to her. What if Karen wasn't acting alone? What if the situation was larger than just a dispute between two neighbors? It was a theory that had crossed her mind before, but it had always seemed too outlandish to pursue. But now, with Karen's increasingly erratic behavior, with her willingness to go to great lengths to prevent Amelia from succeeding, the possibility began to feel more and more plausible. There was a nagging suspicion that Karen might have a network of people behind her, people who were helping her manipulate the situation, perhaps even people with the power to influence the town's legal processes. Amelia had heard whispers in town, rumors about a powerful real estate group that had been buying up property in the area. But it wasn't until now that she started connecting the dots. Could it be that Karen was working with this group? Could this whole fight over the beach access be part of a much larger agenda? One that had nothing to do with a simple property dispute? When Amelia returned home that evening, she called her lawyer, Ben, to discuss her concerns. She knew that he had connections in the legal world, and she hoped that he might be able to help her piece together the puzzle. Ben listened carefully as Amelia explained her theory about Karen's potential ties to a larger real estate operation. "You're not the first person to suggest something like this," Ben said after a long pause. "There have been rumors circulating about a group that's been buying up properties along the coastline. I've heard their name mentioned before, but I didn't think it was something we needed to worry about for your case. But now, with what you've told me, I think it's time we look into it." Amelia felt a glimmer of hope. At least she wasn't alone in her suspicions. Ben promised to investigate the connections between Karen and the real estate group and get back to her as soon as possible. Amelia hung up the phone, her mind racing with possibilities. If Karen was connected to this larger operation, it meant that her motives were not just personal, they were financial. Karen had been trying to stop Amelia, but what if her real goal was to push Amelia out of the picture so that a powerful corporation could swoop in and buy up the property for themselves? Amelia wasn't sure what to believe anymore, but one thing was clear. She needed to dig deeper into Karen's background and connections if she wanted to truly understand what was at stake. The next few days were a whirlwind. Ben had started his investigation, and though he couldn't share all the details with Amelia just yet, he kept her updated with what he found. Meanwhile, the tension in the town began to rise. The meeting Amelia had planned was only days away, and she could feel the pressure mounting from all sides. Karen, for her part, had not relented in her campaign to stop the public beach access. In fact, she seemed to be increasing her efforts. One evening, Amelia received an anonymous tip-off from a local resident who had witnessed Karen in a heated conversation with a man who seemed to be connected to the town's zoning office. According to the witness, the man had handed Karen a folder with legal documents, and their conversation had been intense, though the details remained unclear. The timing couldn't have been worse. Amelia had a sinking feeling that Karen was attempting to use her influence in local government to further her cause. This was the final piece of the puzzle Amelia had been waiting for. The idea that Karen might have been using local officials to push her agenda wasn't just troubling. It was a violation of everything Amelia stood for. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Amelia decided to confront the situation head-on. She arranged to meet with Ben and some of the other local business owners to discuss their next steps. They needed to come up with a strategy to not only address Karen's actions, but also to prepare for the possibility that this was no longer just a personal dispute. Amelia knew she couldn't back down now, not after everything she had invested in this fight, both emotionally and financially. But as she prepared for the community meeting, she realized that this battle was much bigger than she had originally anticipated. It wasn't just a fight for access to the beach anymore. It was a fight for the very soul of the town, for the kind of place it would become in the future. Would it remain a vibrant, welcoming community where people could thrive? Or would it be sold to the highest bidder, its soul stripped away by developers and powerful interests? Amelia couldn't allow that to happen. She had to see this through to the end. As the meeting drew closer, Amelia's thoughts were consumed with what she might be walking into. She knew Karen would try to discredit her, try to twist the situation to her advantage. But Amelia was ready. She had the law on her side, and she had the support of the community behind her. She wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else take that away. This wasn't just about the beach access anymore. This was about protecting the future of the town. And Amelia was prepared to fight for it no matter what it took. The stage was set for a showdown, and Amelia was ready to make her stand. As the day of the community meeting finally arrived, Amelia felt the weight of the battle ahead pressing down on her more than ever. What had started as a simple dispute over access to the beach had evolved into a full-blown fight for the soul of the town, and she couldn't afford to lose. She had spent the last few days preparing for this moment, meeting with Ben and other local business owners to gather evidence, strategize, and rally the community together. The lawyer had managed to dig deeper into Karen's connections, uncovering links to the very real estate company Amelia had suspected. Karen wasn't just fighting for her property. She was fighting to prevent Amelia from building a future that didn't serve her financial interests. The beach access was simply a pawn in a larger game, one in which Karen and her allies were working to manipulate the system for their own gain. As the meeting time drew closer, the tension in the air was palpable. The small, rustic community hall where the meeting was being held was packed with people. Local business owners, concerned residents, and even a few tourists who had heard about the issue and wanted to lend their support. Amelia could see the familiar faces of people who had supported her from the very beginning. Lucy, who had helped spread the word and encourage the town's artists to show up, and Sam, the local fisherman who relied on the beach for his livelihood. But there were also faces in the crowd that Amelia hadn't seen before, some unfamiliar but clearly aligned with Karen's interests. They stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, their eyes scanning the crowd as if sizing up their opponents. It didn't take long for Amelia to realize that Karen had brought in reinforcements. People who didn't live in the town, but who had the kind of influence and resources that could turn the tide in Karen's favor. The meeting began, and the tension was thick in the room. Amelia stood at the front, flanked by her lawyer, Ben, and a few other key figures from the community. The atmosphere was charged, and every word felt like it carried weight. Karen wasn't there yet, but Amelia knew she would be. Amelia's heart raced as she glanced around the room, seeing the mix of hopeful and anxious faces. The first few minutes passed in relative calm as people took their seats, exchanged pleasantries, and waited for the meeting to begin in earnest. Amelia kept her posture straight, trying to mask her nervousness, but inside she was a bundle of energy. This meeting could determine the fate of her dream, the future of the town, and her place in it. Finally, Karen walked into the room, her presence instantly commanding attention. She was wearing a sharp suit, her expression one of controlled arrogance, as though she believed she had already won. She didn't even look at Amelia as she walked past her to the front of the room, taking her seat next to the group of people who had accompanied her. Amelia could feel her blood boil. Karen didn't come here to resolve anything. She came to intimidate, to undermine, and to prove that she had the power to control the outcome of this fight. The first speaker was a local resident, a small business owner who relied heavily on the beach for foot traffic. His voice was steady, but his words were filled with urgency as he explained the financial toll Karen's actions had taken on the community. He spoke about the loss of customers, the disruption to local commerce, and the negative impact Karen's attempts to block access to the beach were having on the town's reputation. As he finished his speech, the room was filled with murmurs of agreement. The community was beginning to rally behind Amelia, but Karen wasn't about to go down without a fight. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she stood up slowly, the kind of calm confidence that only someone with significant power could carry. She didn't address the issue directly, but instead launched into a carefully crafted speech about how important it was to preserve the town's exclusivity and how development needed to be carefully controlled to ensure the safety and long-term viability of the area. She spoke about how the town couldn't afford to let outsiders come in and disrupt the local economy, and how Amelia's plans for a public cafe near the beach were risky for the community's future. Her words were smooth, polished, and carefully calculated to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of those who were listening. She painted herself as a defender of the town's interests, someone who had been looking out for the area long before Amelia had arrived. And she subtly implied that Amelia's dream was a threat to the stability of the local economy. Amelia was furious as she listened, but she knew that she couldn't let herself be distracted by Karen's manipulation. She had to stay focused on the facts, on the truth. She stood up to speak, and the room fell silent. "I understand that change is difficult," Amelia began, her voice calm but resolute. "But what Karen is proposing isn't just about preserving this town's exclusivity. It's about controlling access to a public space for personal gain. This isn't about protecting the town, it's about protecting her interests and the interests of those who stand to profit from her actions." The room was still as Amelia continued, her voice gaining strength. "This beach access is a public right. We are a community, and we need to stand together to make sure that our town remains a place for everyone, not just the few who think they can control it." Amelia could see the tide beginning to turn as her words sank in. There were murmurs of agreement, people nodding, exchanging glances. She pressed on, using the evidence Ben had helped her gather to show that Karen's actions were not only morally wrong but also legally questionable. Karen has been using her influence to manipulate local authorities, to control the access to a public space, and to push her financial agenda. And she's not doing it for the good of the community. She's doing it because it benefits her and those she's working with. At that moment, Karen shot to her feet, her face red with rage. "You're lying!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know anything about the complexities of this town, about the land, about the history of this beach. You're just a city girl who thinks she can come here and change everything without understanding the consequences." Amelia felt the weight of Karen's words, but she didn't flinch. "What I understand, Karen, is that you're afraid. You're afraid of losing control, afraid of having someone challenge you for the first time. But this town belongs to all of us, not just to you and your rich friends." For a moment, the room was silent. Amelia could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, the tension in the air thick. She had said what needed to be said, and she wasn't going to back down. Karen had crossed a line, and now the community was seeing her for what she truly was. A woman more interested in her own power than in the well-being of the town. But Karen wasn't done yet. She wasn't ready to let Amelia win. As the meeting progressed, she began to manipulate the conversation, twisting facts, throwing out personal attacks, and trying to turn the tide in her favor. But Amelia was prepared. She had done her homework, and she wasn't going to let Karen pull her into a spiral of distractions. She kept her focus on the legalities, on the truth, and she pressed forward, never allowing Karen's outbursts to derail her. The meeting lasted for hours, but when it finally concluded, Amelia knew that the fight was far from over. The tension was still thick in the room, but something had shifted. People were talking. They were questioning Karen's motives, looking at her not as the powerful, untouchable figure she had once been, but as someone who was trying to pull the strings of the town for her own benefit. Amelia's words had struck a chord, and the community was beginning to realize that this wasn't just about access to the beach. It was about standing up against someone who thought they could dictate how things should be. As the meeting ended, Amelia felt a sense of cautious optimism. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step in the right direction. Karen had thrown everything she had at Amelia, but Amelia had weathered the storm, and now the tide was turning. The real battle, however, was just beginning. As the days passed following the heated community meeting, the tension in the town only continued to escalate. The atmosphere had shifted in subtle ways. People who had once been passive in the conflict were now beginning to take sides, and though Karen had the resources and influence to dominate the conversation, Amelia had become the symbol of resistance. It wasn't just about the beach anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had, for far too long, thought she could impose her will on the town and its people. Amelia had made it clear to everyone that she wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else bully her into submission. But as the battle grew fiercer, the stakes became even higher. Every move felt like it could be the tipping point, and every word spoken seemed to hold more weight than the last. Amelia knew that Karen wouldn't simply back down. If anything, she'd only escalate the situation, using every tool at her disposal to try and crush Amelia's resolve. The constant intimidation had started to take its toll on Amelia, and though she maintained a calm, collected exterior, inside she was growing weary of the fight. Still, she wasn't one to walk away from something she believed in, and she had come too far to turn back now. The last few weeks had been nothing but one challenge after another, and Karen's next move seemed inevitable. She would find a way to force Amelia's hand, to take the fight to the next level. It was on a crisp, overcast morning that Amelia received the call. Her phone buzzed loudly on the counter as she was making her morning coffee. The name on the screen was Ben, her lawyer. "Amelia," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I need you to come down to my office. It's about Karen." Amelia's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately felt a surge of unease wash over her. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Ben hesitated for a moment before answering. "Karen's moving fast, and I think she's using her connections in ways that we didn't expect. I've got something here that you need to see." She didn't hesitate. Grabbing her coat and leaving her half-finished cup of coffee behind, Amelia rushed out the door and into her car, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. Was it more threats? Was Karen using more underhanded tactics to sabotage her project? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she knew that whatever it was, it couldn't be good. By the time Amelia arrived at Ben's office, her nerves were on edge. Ben met her in the lobby with a grave look on his face, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He gestured for her to follow him into his office, where he shut the door behind them. Amelia could feel her breath quicken as she sat down across from him. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben sat down opposite her, pulling a thick stack of documents from his desk. "I've been going over some of Karen's legal filings," he began, flipping through the papers. "And I'm afraid she's got something big planned. She's filed for an injunction, but that's not the worst part." Amelia's heart sank as she processed his words. "What do you mean, an injunction?" Ben nodded. "She's trying to block all development on the property, claiming that you're disrupting the coastal ecosystem. But there's more. She's gone further. She's filed a motion to have the property seized, claiming that you're in violation of local environmental regulations. The twist is, she's found a local environmental group to back her up. They're using this as leverage to push for a massive legal battle that could drag on for months, if not years." Amelia sat frozen, her mind spinning with disbelief. This wasn't just a petty attempt to take control of the beach. This was a full-scale attack, a legal and financial assault meant to drain her resources and force her to give up. Karen had clearly calculated her next move, and it was a calculated, strategic blow aimed at destroying everything Amelia had worked for. "What can we do?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. Ben leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "We fight back, but it won't be easy. The good news is that Karen's motion is full of holes. Her claims are based on shaky evidence, and we can prove that the development is not only legal but beneficial to the community." But, he paused, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Karen's not going to back down. She'll use every legal avenue at her disposal to drag this out. It's going to get ugly." Amelia's mind was racing. The idea of fighting a battle like this was daunting, but she knew there was no other option. She couldn't let Karen win. Not now, not after everything. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Ben slid a set of papers across the desk toward her. "We'll need to counter her claims with solid evidence. We've already got a strong case, but we need to make sure we have the backing of the town. We need people to speak up, to show that the community is behind you. And we need to go public with this, expose the truth about Karen and her ties to the developers. Once we do that, we can take the case to court and make sure it's clear that her actions are nothing more than an attempt to profit off this town." Amelia took a deep breath. It was exactly what she needed to hear. She wasn't alone in this fight, and Ben was right. This wasn't just about the beach access. It was about everything Karen had tried to take from her and the community. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter how hard the fight. But as the days wore on, it became clear that Karen wasn't about to make this easy. The media started picking up on the story, and Karen's campaign to seize control of the property began to gain momentum. Amelia's phone rang constantly with reporters asking for comments, eager to cover the growing legal battle. Meanwhile, Karen's supporters were rallying, speaking in favor of her claims and painting Amelia as an outsider who was threatening the delicate balance of the town. The battle for the beach was no longer just a legal issue. It had become a full-scale public spectacle. And Amelia was right in the middle of it, with everything she had worked for hanging in the balance. The night before the court hearing, Amelia sat alone in her house, surrounded by the quiet hum of the ocean and the distant sound of the wind outside. She had poured everything into this fight, and tomorrow would be the culmination of everything. She had no idea how it would end, but she knew one thing for certain. She was going to fight with everything she had. The next morning, as Amelia stood in the courthouse waiting for the proceedings to begin, she could feel the weight of the entire town on her shoulders. This wasn't just her battle, it was the battle of every person who believed in the heart of the community. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the future of the town, for the people who relied on the beach, for the dream that had kept her going through the hardest days. When the judge entered the courtroom, the tension in the air was palpable. Amelia's heart raced as the case was presented, but in the end, it was the truth that prevailed. The evidence was too strong, Karen's claims too weak, and the community's support for Amelia undeniable. The judge ruled in her favor and Karen's motion was dismissed. But the victory didn't end there. The ruling was a signal that the town had had enough. It was time for change, for a future where people like Karen could no longer manipulate the system for their own gain. And Amelia, with the support of the community, had won not just the beach, but the heart of the town. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. The dream had survived, and so had Amelia's resolve. The days following the court's ruling were a whirlwind for Amelia. The weight that had been bearing down on her for so long had finally lifted, but the battle was far from over. While Karen's attempts to seize control of the beach had been thwarted, the consequences of the fight reverberated through the town. The community that had rallied behind Amelia was now in the process of rebuilding, coming together to ensure that such a divisive issue would never again threaten the heart of their small coastal town. Amelia's Cafe had become a symbol of resilience, a place where people from all walks of life came together to celebrate not just the victory, but the unity that had brought them all to this point. The beachfront access was restored, but more importantly, it was a reminder of what the town stood for, a place of shared community, freedom, and mutual respect. As Amelia stood in front of her cafe one afternoon, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The fight had tested her in ways she never imagined, forcing her to confront the darker sides of human nature. But it had also shown her just how strong she was, and how powerful a determined community could be when it stood united against forces that threatened its core values. Karen, on the other hand, was no longer a fixture in the town. After the defeat in court and the public backlash that followed, she had sold her property and left without fanfare, her influence gone as quickly as it had arrived. There were whispers in the town that her financial backers had cut ties with her, and that her reputation was tarnished beyond repair. For Amelia, however, Karen's departure was bittersweet. While she had won, the victory had cost her more than just time and money. She had lost a part of herself in the process, a part of her innocence about the world and the people in it. But as the town began to heal, so did Amelia. She had not only won the beach access, but she had also gained something more important: the respect of her community and the sense that she had truly earned her place there. The cafe had flourished in the months following the trial. The townspeople had embraced it, and word spread quickly that it was a place where one could find peace, comfort, and most importantly, a sense of belonging. Amelia's vision for a gathering space had come to life, and she knew that every cup of coffee served and every meal shared was a small testament to the strength of the community that had supported her. As the years went by, the beach became a place of fond memories for many, a space where people could relax and reconnect with nature. Amelia continued to nurture her cafe, but now with a renewed sense of purpose. She often looked back on the fight with Karen, reflecting on how much it had shaped her. But she also knew that the town had grown stronger because of it. It was no longer just about the beach or the cafe. It was about what they had all learned together. The people of the town had rediscovered what it meant to be a community, and for Amelia, that was the true victory. She didn't need to fight any longer for the beach access. It was secure, it was hers, and most importantly, it was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, one person's determination could make all the difference. In the end, Amelia had become not just a business owner, but a symbol of resilience and hope, proving that with the right support, no obstacle was too great to overcome. And as the waves lapped gently against the shore, Amelia couldn't help but smile, knowing that the future was bright for her, for the cafe, and for the town she had come to love as her own.